I'm basically white balancing this video with my face. I'm so pale. I grew up in the north of England in the late 80s and early 90s, and my earliest and strongest memory of Margaret Thatcher is a rhyme that we used to sing in primary school that went, "This is Maggie Thatcher, throw her up and catch her, squish her, squash her, this is Maggie Thatcher." That might seem slightly disrespectful on this, the day of her funeral, and I know that a lot of people have objected already to everyone singing Ding Dong, the Witch is Dead, and having death parties and protesting the funeral today. I don't understand why people have objected and why they're sort of making a plea for compassion, because as much as she has this image of a pantomime villain, she was a real person, a frail old lady with real surviving relatives who will mourn her loss. But people aren't celebrating her death for no reason. Yes, she was a real person whose real policies had a very real and devastating effect on the lives of millions of other real people and their families. And death doesn't absolve her of her responsibility in causing all that misery and pain. I think people should be remembered in death for their actions in life and the legacy that they leave behind. And in Thatcher's case, that's a legacy that is still all too alive and kicking the poorest and most vulnerable members of society while they're down. But as this is a feminist channel, I want to focus in this video on her legacy as the first and to date only woman Prime Minister of the UK. So to start with, let's clarify something that really should be obvious but apparently isn't. Being a woman doesn't necessarily make you a feminist, and being a powerful woman doesn't necessarily make you a feminist icon. Thatcher's election was certainly indicative of the progress that we've made over the past few hundred years, and I've seen several women remark in the last few days that just growing up with a woman as Prime Minister meant and signified a huge deal to them in showing them what a woman could do, that a woman could be Prime Minister, could lead the country, that was just normal. And that kind of visual representation, especially when you're young, is really important and isn't something we should overlook. But it's also far from the only thing that matters. Her election as a woman was and is significant, but it was only really possible because in every other way she fit very neatly into the status quo. As a straight white woman who married into wealth and class privilege after working her way up from humble beginnings as a grocer's daughter, she fit the dominant conservative narrative of how respectable women were supposed to behave if they wanted to get ahead. The idea was that it wasn't discrimination, oppression, or sexist attitudes holding other women or any marginalised group back. It was just a lack of ambition and hard work and personal responsibility. And as far as Thatcher was concerned, her success was hers and hers alone, and she owed nothing to the collective and ongoing work of feminists fighting for women's equality. To quote the woman herself, "The battle for women's rights has largely been won. I owe nothing to women's lib, and I hate feminism. It is poison." Once in power, Thatcher did little to help other women succeed, as she had, and under her government, inequality only increased as her policies actively made life much, much worse for millions of women across the country. We've talked before in our Girl Hate videos, which I'll link to in the description, about how women will sometimes drag each other down in an attempt to access the limited power and respect that we're afforded. Instead of working to break the stereotypes and assumptions that hold women back, or point out how and where they're wrong, we perpetuate them but distance ourselves from their implications by claiming that, oh, we're the exception, we're not like those other girls. And I'd argue we're able to do this because patriarchal society denigrates and undervalues not just women, but also femininity, anything stereotypically associated with being a woman. Even apparently positive feminine traits like being compassionate, cooperative, nurturing, or emotionally open are not traits that we look for or value most in our leaders. And I can hardly imagine anyone using those traits to describe Margaret Thatcher. She was, after all, called the Iron Lady. Thatcher may have succeeded in spite of being a woman, but she did little to dispel the negative stereotypes or undervaluing of femininity or traits associated with women. She fit squarely with the intimidating, strong-willed, forthright, masculine-coded traits that we look for in leaders. In spite of all this, though, has her legacy led to more women in politics? Well, statistically, yes. In the last 30 years since her election, the representation of women in the House of Commons has increased from around 3% to around 20%. How much of that increase can be credited to Thatcher is highly debatable, and campaigners have warned that in the last few years the increase has started to stagnate compared to previous years. But it is a big step forward. I wonder, though, how many people voted for Thatcher in 1979 only because we'd never had a woman as Prime Minister before. I remember my A-level history teacher, a working class Yorkshire woman, telling us with somewhat bitter regret that she voted Conservative in 1979 just because she wanted to see if a woman could do a better job. And I wonder how many people did the same, and how many people would now vote for a woman as Prime Minister again, given how our society often views the success or failure of one woman as indicative of the whole gender in a way that is never applied to men. There's been loads of great articles in the last few weeks about Thatcher's legacy and what it means for feminism and what it means for politics in the UK in general, and I'll put a bunch of those links in the description. I certainly don't think of Thatcher as a feminist. She didn't think of herself as a feminist, and her actions have nothing to do with any brand of feminism that I want to be associated with. But let me know what you think in the comments, and I'll see you whenever I next make a video.